I shouldn't have come. That's what I kept telling myself as we stood barely a breath apart in the back of that half-lit garage, the chill of late October sneaking in through the cracked concrete walls. His eyes locked onto mine with that unbearable calmness, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. I wasn't sure who leaned in first, but the world around us blurred, the flickering fluorescent light, the distant hum of someone's leaf blower across the alley, even the thump of my heartbeat in my ears. My mouth parted slightly, instinctively, stupidly. Then, the overhead bulb buzzed and blew with a pop. We both flinched. The moment snapped. I stepped back as the door banged open behind me. I turned toward the noise and everything began to unravel. Before I begin the story and tell you how everything really happened, answer this question: would you be able to forgive a loved one's betrayal? I lost my job at the worst possible time, 4 days after Labor Day, just as the leaves were starting to change, as if nature itself decided it was time to strip everything down. They called it downsizing, but the truth was, I was replaceable. The library board didn't even let me finish the week. 1 minute I was restocking books and recommending Hemingway to a couple in their 60s, and the next I was carrying a cardboard box past a stack of donated puzzles and out the front doors I'd unlocked every morning for 11 years. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, staring at the steering wheel. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stopped. Rent was due in 12 days. Groceries were already on fumes, some expired yogurt, a half bag of flour, and 2 frozen chicken breasts I kept saving for a better time. I'd maxed out my last credit card trying to help my boyfriend pay off a medical bill back in June. He had promised to handle things moving forward. The next morning, a notice was slipped under my door. A thick orange paper. Final payment request, $1,950 due immediately. I reread it 5 times before I folded it and stuffed it into my bag like trash. I didn't want to ask him. But I had no choice. He was on shift at the Applebee's off Bluemound. I waited in a booth near the bar, nursing a free glass of water. He was laughing with one of the younger servers, the kind with fake nails and real lashes. I waved him over. He sighed when he saw me. "I need help," I said. "Just this once." He leaned against the booth. "I've got bills too. I already floated you last time, remember? That was $100. I've never asked you for real help before." "You're not my wife," he muttered. "Don't make me feel like I'm failing someone I don't owe anything to." I stared at him. Not because I was shocked, but because he believed it when he said it. When I got back home, I sat in the dark. No TV. No lights. Just the hum of the fridge, like an echo of my own hollow chest. Around 9:30, there was a knock. I opened the door and found him standing there. My landlord. He looked the same as always. Quiet. Polished, in that old-fashioned way. Slacks, a tucked-in shirt, and a thin black watch. The smell of pine and aftershave. He held a folder under one arm. "I assume you got the notice," he said. I nodded. "I don't like confrontation, so I'll be brief. You're 3 weeks late, and I can't extend this much longer. But I also know life happens." I waited, unsure whether to thank him or defend myself. He took a breath, looked down the hallway, then back at me. "There's another way. It's not formal. It's not what people like to talk about. But sometimes, kindness is messy. If you're willing to consider an arrangement, I'm willing to forget the debt." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The silence thickened between us. He didn't press. He just nodded, then handed me the folder, my rental agreement, and turned to leave. I stood there, holding it, until my fingers went numb. The next morning, I woke up early and drove around the city, looking for work. I applied at the Dollar Tree on Greenfield. I walked into Aldi and asked to speak to the manager. I stopped by a consignment shop, then a Walgreens, then even a car wash on Capitol Drive. Each time, I got the same look, sympathy dressed as disinterest. By sunset, I was back on my couch, knees pulled to my chest, a heating pad doing nothing for the ache behind my ribs. That night, I heard the creak of the mail slot. Another envelope. Inside, a printed note with his handwriting at the bottom. Still thinking about it? I ripped it up. But I didn't throw it away. I made dinner out of boiled pasta and a slice of American cheese. I tried watching something on Netflix, but my internet was glitching. I turned it off. On Thursday, I got desperate enough to walk to his house. He lived 2 blocks away, in one of those solid brick ranch homes from the 50s. Lawn trimmed like military precision. A wooden American flag above the garage. I rang the bell. He opened the door slowly, as if he already knew I'd come. "I want to talk," I said. He let me in. His house was filled with silence. Clean, but untouched. Like someone lived there without leaving fingerprints. We sat in his kitchen. He made tea. Mint. No sugar. "I'm not trying to humiliate you," he said. "But I also don't think you should go hungry out of pride." "Is that what you think I am?" I asked. "Proud? No. I think you're afraid of losing the last bit of control you have." He was right. The next day I went to the Community Resource Center. The line was out the door. Inside, they gave me a packet. Pages of forms. Income statements, tax returns, IDs, references. I left it all in my car. I didn't return home until dusk. I didn't want to sit in that apartment, staring at an unpaid bill taped to my fridge. Instead, I drove to the edge of town. Watched kids get off the yellow school bus. Watched their mothers wave from porches. I felt invisible. Like I had slipped between chapters of someone else's book. Back home, I found him standing outside my door. "Just wanted to check if you were okay," he said. "I'm not." He nodded slowly. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but instead, he handed me a bag from Trader Joe's. Inside, bread, eggs, soup, bananas. "I didn't come to buy you," he said. "But I also can't watch you starve to protect some man's ego." He turned to leave. I called after him. "What do you mean?" He paused. "Your boyfriend. He's at the Applebee's off Bluemound, right?" "Yes." "Then maybe you should stop by tonight." I did. I parked across the street. I waited in the shadows. At 10:07 p.m., he walked out the back door. She followed him, long hair, short skirt, laughing like she owned the world. They kissed. Not a polite peck. Not an accident. He pulled her close, like I had never mattered. Like I was already gone. And just like that, I was. I stayed in the car longer than I should have. My hands were on the wheel, but the keys lay silent in the cup holder. Across the street, the red glow of Applebee's flickered over wet pavement. I kept replaying the image, his hand on her lower back, her laugh, the kiss. Not even a guilty glance over the shoulder. I didn't remember driving home. Somehow, the night swallowed my thoughts and spat me out at my apartment door. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. The apartment felt colder than usual. I opened the fridge, stared inside, then shut it again. The bananas from the Trader Joe's bag had gone soft. I tossed them in the trash. I didn't want to think. So I walked. Through the crisp morning air, past familiar sidewalks with their spiderweb cracks and fading chalk drawings. I walked until my feet hurt. I passed 2 open houses, a nail salon, and a bakery piping cinnamon into the street. I didn't stop. By the time I returned, the envelope was waiting for me again. The same lettering. The same pressure behind the paper. This time, I didn't crumble it. I sat on the couch with it on my lap. My landlord's words echoing from 2 nights ago. Sometimes, kindness is messy. That afternoon, I took a shower, dried my hair, and put on the only sweater that didn't have holes in the sleeves. I stood at the door for a long time. Then I walked 2 blocks, turned left, and rang his doorbell. He opened almost immediately. No smile. Just a quiet acknowledgement in his eyes, like he'd been expecting this exact knock. We didn't speak much. He made tea again. Same kind. No sugar. We sat in his living room this time. The carpet was older, with a faint trace of cigarettes that must have lived here long before I did. There were books stacked along the wall, neat rows of hard covers with broken spines and gold titles. An old radio murmured softly in the background, some jazz station from Madison, barely coming in. He told me he used to listen to this station with his wife before bed. They didn't always talk, but the music filled the silence just enough. I listened. I didn't have much to say. After a while, he offered to drive me somewhere, said he knew a place that served decent soup for under $10. I didn't have anywhere else to be. So I went. The place was small and hidden between a shuttered consignment store and a failing dry cleaner. Wood paneling lined the walls, and the menu hadn't changed since the Clinton administration. But the soup was hot, the bread came free, and no one asked us anything. We talked about dumb things. Movie quotes. The absurdity of airport security. How Halloween had lost its charm. He didn't bring up rent. He didn't bring up the envelope. On the drive back, I watched the leaves scatter under his tires. He drove slow, like someone who knew what it felt like to lose time. When we pulled up in front of his house, he didn't reach for the handle. "You want to come in?" he asked, almost like he regretted it as soon as he said it. I hesitated. Then nodded. Inside, the hallway lights flickered once, then held. The furnace kicked on with a growl from the basement. He poured more tea. We didn't sit this time. We just stood near the kitchen table, both unsure of what came next. The silence stretched. And then we kissed. It lasted just long enough for reality to catch up. I pulled away first. He didn't speak. His hands remained at his sides. I left. Back at home, the air in my apartment felt heavier than before. I turned on the bathroom light and stared at myself in the mirror. This wasn't about rent anymore. That night, I tossed and turned. Not because of guilt, not even confusion. Just a sense that something irreversible had started. The following day I tried to make things normal again. I swept the kitchen. Answered an old email about a resume that would go nowhere. Walked to the corner store for eggs, even though I didn't plan to cook. On my way back, I passed a familiar face in an unfamiliar setting, my landlord, walking out of the pharmacy holding a paper bag and a folded receipt. He noticed me. Smiled faintly. We nodded, like strangers who shared a secret. Later that evening, I heard the mail slot clatter. Another envelope. Inside this one, a check. My name written carefully. The rent amount, dated 3 days ago. No note. No explanation. I stared at it, stunned. Then knocked on his door. He answered quickly again. "I didn't ask for this," I said. "I know. You can't just." I didn't do it for favors. Then why? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned back into the hallway, motioned for me to follow. I did. He led me into a narrow room at the back of his house. Inside, a dusty piano, an old rocking chair, and shelves packed with old VHS tapes. A single photo sat on the upright piano, a woman in her 40s, laughing, holding a sparkler. "My wife," he said quietly. "She used to say, sometimes the world lets people drift into your life at the exact moment they're both falling apart." I said nothing. She drifted in after my brother died. And I was angry at everything. She stayed anyway. He looked at me. "You don't have to stay," he added. "But I won't let you drown just because your pride won't let you reach." I left without replying. On the way back to my building, I stopped by my mailbox. Empty. Then I noticed a blue sedan parked at the corner of the block, my boyfriend's. He stepped out, holding something. A bouquet from Kroger. The kind with the cellophane still crinkling around the stems. He smiled like nothing was wrong. Like we hadn't disappeared from each other's lives. "I wanted to talk," he said. "I've been thinking a lot. Maybe we should just move in together. That way you wouldn't have to deal with all this crap. I've got space. You could get back on your feet." I stared at him. The man who'd told me I wasn't his responsibility. The man who'd kissed someone else behind a restaurant. He handed me the flowers. I didn't take them. He laughed awkwardly. "Come on. Don't be like that. I get it. You're upset. But this is me trying. I'm not great with words." I turned, unlocked the building door, and walked inside. The bouquet landed on the ground behind me with a soft thud. I didn't look back. When I entered my apartment, I kicked off my shoes, walked to the sink, and filled a glass with water I didn't drink. Then I sat on the couch. And realized I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was finished. Which is why the knock on the door an hour later hit harder than it should have. I opened it slowly. And there he stood. The man I wasn't supposed to be thinking about. He didn't speak. Neither did I. Because this time, silence said everything. And that's when I saw the envelope in his hand. But it wasn't for me. It was addressed to the building's management. And it had a check sticking halfway out of it, triple the rent amount. "That was never part of the deal," I whispered. He nodded. "I know," he said. "But maybe it should have been." I didn't sleep that night. The envelope, the triple payment, the silence between us, it all played like static in my head, never quite forming a full picture, but too loud to ignore. I kept asking myself why he did it. And more dangerously, what it meant that I let him. By morning, the apartment felt too small for the noise in my chest. I pulled on my coat and left without a plan. The streets were already busy. Cars lined up at Starbucks. A dog barked behind a fence I passed every day and had never noticed. Everything looked the same, but none of it felt the same. I walked for over an hour. Past the bus depot. Through the college campus. I even wandered into a church parking lot, though I didn't step inside. I didn't need a sermon. I needed clarity, and that wasn't going to come from stained glass. By noon, I found myself at the library. Not my old one, the big public branch downtown. I didn't go in. I just stood outside, staring at the banners advertising a fall book sale. The wind picked up, rustling leaves into frantic circles on the sidewalk. I turned away before they settled. Back home, I opened the fridge and stared again. I was starting to hate that fridge. I boiled water, made instant oatmeal, then dumped it into the sink after 2 bites. By late afternoon, I was restless again. So when I saw him outside, placing trash bins back behind his fence, I didn't wait. I crossed the street, walked right up, and said, "You bought me out of a crisis." Then said nothing about it. That's not normal. He didn't flinch. Just straightened up and wiped his hands on a rag. "I didn't think it needed an explanation," he said. "It does. It's your dignity," he replied. "I was trying not to take it from you." We stood there, 2 adults on a sidewalk, acting like we weren't balancing on the edge of something sharp. He looked at me. "Do you want to get out of town for a bit? Just for the day?" I blinked. He clarified. "There's a small antique fair out past the lake. Good way to disappear from your own head for a few hours." I almost said no. But I nodded. The drive was quiet at first. His car smelled faintly of pine and old leather. A cassette was playing, something jazzy, scratchy, warm. We didn't talk until we were halfway there. He asked what my favorite movie was. I couldn't answer. He asked what job I would take if money didn't matter. I said bookstore owner, then laughed, because of course I did. He didn't laugh. "That suits you," he said. The antique fair was built around a farm field. White tents flapped in the breeze. Everything smelled like kettle corn and hay. Couples shuffled around in thick coats, pointing at vintage mirrors and rusted toy cars. He bought me a mug. Green ceramic with a crack down the side. "Imperfections keep it from being ordinary," he said. We wandered for hours. He never once brought up rent. Or my apartment. Or anything that could have pulled me back into my own storm. It was almost sunset when we left. On the drive back, I stared at the horizon while he hummed along to the music. His hand stayed on the wheel the whole time. Back in town, we didn't go straight home. He drove us to the end of the pier. The water was steel gray, the wind slicing off the lake and pushing hair into my eyes. We got out of the car and stood by the railing, shoulders close but not touching. He said, "My wife loved it here. Even in winter. She said the cold made everything honest." I nodded, even though I didn't know what that meant yet. He looked at me. "You're allowed to start over, you know." "I don't know where to start." "You just did." We kissed. No heat. No hunger. Just gravity. When I got home, my ex was sitting on the stairs of my building. Again. He stood when he saw me. No flowers this time. Just a tired face and a paper bag. "I brought dinner," he said. I didn't invite him in. But I sat beside him on the steps. He handed me a takeout box from that overpriced taco place I used to love. He'd remembered. We ate in silence. Every bite was heavier than the last. "I was a jerk," he said finally. "You didn't deserve that." "No," I replied. "I didn't." He looked up at me. "We were good once. Maybe we can get back there." "You were good to you," I said. "I was just convenient." He didn't answer. When I stood, he asked if he could come up. I said no. He nodded like he already knew the answer. Inside, the apartment was quiet. I put the food box on the counter and didn't touch it again. The next day, I tried to settle into something normal. I cleaned. Reorganized the junk drawer. Wrote down job leads I wasn't sure even existed. Anything to pretend life was manageable. Late that afternoon, I went for another walk. No destination. Just motion. I ended up at the hardware store, browsing light bulbs I didn't need. I turned a corner and saw him, my landlord, talking with someone near the paint aisle. An older woman. His age. She laughed at something he said, touching his elbow lightly. I froze. He saw me. A flicker of surprise. Then calm. He nodded once. I turned and walked away before he could come over. Back home, I sat on the edge of my bed for an hour. I kept hearing that laugh. Seeing her hand on his arm. It shouldn't have mattered. But it did. That evening, he showed up at my door. Not in a suit. Not with papers. In a fleece jacket, looking more real than I'd ever seen him. He didn't ask to come in. She's my sister, he said. I figured you'd wonder. I said nothing. I was married for 20 years, he added. But the last 2, I didn't know how to talk to her anymore. She was dying and pretending not to. I let her pretend. I looked down at my hands. He continued, I'm not good at fixing things. But I am good at showing up. He left. I didn't move for a long time. Later that night, I opened my front door to get some air. There was a note taped to it. Typed. A notice. Effective January 1st, the building had been listed for sale. Occupants would be required to vacate within 30 days unless lease terms were renegotiated with the new owner. My lease had no extension clause. I stood there, frozen in the doorway, reading it again and again as if it would change. Then I looked across the street. His house. One light on. His silhouette in the kitchen, pouring something into a mug. And I realized. He hadn't mentioned a thing. I stood at the door for a long time after reading the notice, the cold air pushing against my back like it wanted me gone too. The paper crinkled between my fingers, the official stamp in the corner making it all feel that much more final. 30 days. No warning. No conversation. No explanation from the one person who knew this was coming and said nothing. By morning, the numbness had settled into something tighter. I couldn't sit still. I left the apartment before the sun rose and circled the block 3 times on foot before convincing myself to knock on his door. He opened it quickly, as if he'd been expecting it again. No hello. No smile. You knew. He didn't deny it. I didn't want to worry you, he said. The words fell flat. He poured coffee like nothing was wrong while I sat at the table, arms folded, staring at the tiny crack in the ceramic mug I'd once complimented. I found out the same day you did, he added. But I've been trying to stop it. I looked at him. Trying how? There's an investment group. They're planning to level this building and build something newer. I've been negotiating. But you didn't tell me. I thought I could fix it first. His voice was calm, but I could see the tension in the way he gripped the handle of the pot. He wasn't lying. He just wasn't honest either. Let me take you somewhere, he said suddenly. Get out of this neighborhood for a while. Clear your head. You need that. I almost refused. But the walls of my apartment had already started to feel like they were closing in. We drove west, out of the city, past fields half frozen in midwinter stillness. The road narrowed the farther we got, until the only sound was the wind and the tires against cracked asphalt. He didn't tell me where we were going, and I didn't ask. Eventually, we pulled into a long gravel drive lined with tall pines. A small, rustic motel sat at the end, just past a faded wooden sign that read Birch Hollow Lodge. The place looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s, cheap siding, dim lights in the windows, but something about it felt removed from time. Removed from problems. He checked in, no hesitation. Just asked for a 2-bedroom and handed over his ID. We drove further into town after that, to a diner with silver siding and booths that squeaked every time someone shifted. The waitress called everyone Han and the menu was stuck inside a cracked vinyl cover. He ordered grilled cheese and tomato soup. I ordered the same without realizing I'd mirrored him. We didn't talk much. But for the first time in days, I didn't feel like I had to. After dinner, we walked by the lake, silent again. It had started to snow, just a whisper of white drifting from the sky. The lake was frozen in parts, the edges jagged with thin, glittering ice. We walked to the end of the dock. He stood there like he belonged to the stillness. "I used to come here when I needed to think," he said. "After she died, I stayed here for 3 nights straight. No one knew where I was. I just needed to be somewhere that didn't expect anything from me." I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to. Back at the motel, the room was warm but quiet. Wood paneling on the walls, 2 beds with plaid blankets, a small TV bolted to the dresser. We took off our coats. I sat at the edge of one bed while he opened the curtains to watch the snow start to build up outside. We spent night together. In the morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. He was already dressed, pouring steaming mugs from the drip pot in the corner. He handed me one. No words. I looked out the window. The world was white. Clean. Silent. On the drive home, the air between us shifted. It wasn't awkward, it was understood. Something had changed, and neither of us felt the need to label it. But the moment we pulled into the city, the stillness shattered. In front of my building, my ex stood beside his car, a box in his hands and 2 more stacked on the curb. He spotted us before we even parked. I stepped out first. "What is this?" I asked. He grinned like it was a joke. "I figured we could make it official. Move in together. I started packing your stuff for you." "You, what?" "You've been distant. I figured maybe you were just overwhelmed. So I'm stepping up. Finally doing the thing you always wanted." I didn't respond. He nodded toward my landlord, still seated in the car. "What's he doing here?" I turned back, watched him slowly exit, standing still like he knew this was a mistake to witness. My ex followed my gaze. His smile dropped. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. "Him?" The box in his hand slipped, spilling half-packed toiletries onto the wet sidewalk. I stepped forward. "You don't decide where I live." "Not anymore." "I was trying to help," he snapped. "You can't even pay your rent." I opened my mouth, then shut it. I didn't owe him that explanation. Without another word, I walked past him, picked up the boxes from the curb, and started carrying them inside, one by one. Not for him. For me. When I came back out to grab the last one, he was gone. Just tire tracks in the slush and a trail of spilled shampoo on the sidewalk. Later that evening, as I settled back into the apartment that was still legally mine for now, I noticed something tucked into the screen door, a manila folder. Inside, a copy of a letter. From a local attorney. Addressed to the developers. A formal counteroffer. Signed by my landlord. No explanation. Just action. And at the bottom of the page, in faint pencil, a single line written for no one else's eyes but mine. "I'll keep fighting. Even if you leave before I win." The folder sat on my kitchen table for 3 days. I didn't open it again. I didn't need to. I already knew what was inside, a document that said more in silence than any conversation ever could. He hadn't told me he was fighting for the building. He hadn't promised to fix anything. He just acted. But action without explanation? That was still noise. On the 4th day, I woke up to pounding on the door. I pulled my coat over my shoulders and cracked it open, already bracing for some form of interruption. It was him. He looked worn down. The sharpness in his posture had softened, the calm certainty replaced with something closer to restlessness. "I need to talk," he said. "Outside." I stepped out without grabbing gloves. The air bit hard. We walked the block in silence before he finally said, "They countered my offer." "How bad?" "Bad enough that I can't match it." The weight of his words didn't surprise me. What caught me off guard was how casually he said it, like he'd accepted something inevitable and just didn't know how to tell me sooner. "So, that's it?" I asked. "No. That's not it. I found another way. A friend of mine, he owns a place just outside of Madison. It's run down, but legal, and I can lease it under your name." My steps slowed. "You're trying to move me out?" "No," he said. "I'm trying to give you a choice." I didn't reply. Not because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't sure which part to argue with first, the fact that he'd done all this without asking me, or the fact that it made sense. We looped back around to the building, the cold wind now gnawing at my fingertips. I went back upstairs without another word, sat on the couch, and stared at my living room like I was seeing it for the last time. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't sit anymore. I got in my car and drove without a plan, past downtown, across the river, up into the residential edges where lawns were wider and problems stayed behind closed doors. I found myself in front of a familiar house, a friend's I hadn't visited in months. She was home. She always was. We drank tea in her over-decorated living room and talked about everything except what was actually happening. She told me her son was thinking of moving back in. Her neighbor was remodeling her kitchen just because someone else's husband had bought a boat. Normal people with normal problems. None of it applied to me. When I finally confessed what was going on, the eviction, the man, the almosts, she didn't flinch. "You've always had a spine," she said. "You just forget it sometimes when someone's nice to you." That stayed with me. On the drive home, I stopped at Walgreens to buy detergent. The cashier handed me my change with a smile, asked if I wanted a receipt. I said no. Something about the simplicity of that exchange calmed me more than it should have. Back home, I found a small cardboard box outside my door. My ex's handwriting scrawled across the top in permanent marker. Inside, half-used shampoo, a crumpled sweater of mine, and a note, "Thought you'd want your stuff back. Keep the rest." I threw the note away without reading it again. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the folder in front of me again. I still didn't open it. Instead, I scribbled a list of every place I'd lived since turning 21. 11 addresses in total. And then I wrote one question underneath: which one ever felt like mine? In the morning, I walked to his house. He answered quickly, like always. "I want to see the new place," I said. "The one outside Madison." He nodded without hesitation. The drive was quiet. He didn't try to convince me of anything. The radio stayed off. The windows fogged slightly from our breath. The house sat at the end of a gravel road, past a cluster of bare trees and frost-covered fields. A faded blue two-story with warped siding and an old swing set in the backyard. It was nothing special. And yet, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Stillness. Not silence, just stillness. We walked through it together. The inside smelled of dust and something sweet buried in the walls, maybe old wood or someone's long-gone baking. There were stains on the carpet. A missing cabinet door in the kitchen. A cracked window upstairs. But there was space. Light. Bones worth building on. I could live here, I said before I meant to. I know, he said quietly. We didn't stay long. He wanted me to see it, not to rush a decision. On the way back, we stopped for coffee in a roadside diner where the waitress wore a Green Bay Packers hoodie and called me sweetheart twice. She poured extra cream without asking. I didn't protest. Back in town, the sun was dipping low. He dropped me off at my building without asking to come up. Just parked, waited as I unbuckled. But I didn't get out. I'm not going to Madison, I said finally. Not yet. You don't have to. I want to fix things here first. I want to fight for something too. Even if I lose. He nodded. I opened the door and stepped out. Don't do anything behind my back again, I said before shutting it. He nodded again, slower this time. Inside my apartment, I cleaned everything. Not as a goodbye. Not yet. Just to prove to myself that I still owned something, even for a little while longer. 2 days passed. No news. No knocks. I started making plans, writing budgets, drawing up resumes again. I even called a woman I knew who worked part-time at the local bookstore to ask if they had anything open, even weekend shifts. Then, on a rainy Wednesday afternoon, I returned home with a bag of groceries and found him standing outside my door. But he wasn't alone. Next to him stood a young woman. Early 30s, maybe. Dark coat. No umbrella. Her arms were crossed tightly, her eyes fixed on mine like she was solving a problem out loud. He looked tired. She looked furious. And before anyone could speak, she said the words I'll never forget. I'm his daughter. And he didn't tell you about me, did he? She didn't blink. Just stood there like she had rehearsed this moment 100 times on the drive over. I glanced at him. His face didn't change, not even a twitch. But the way his hands dropped to his sides said everything. No, he hadn't told me. She stepped forward without waiting for an invitation. Her coat was damp, dark patches climbing the sleeves. Her voice calm but sharp. The kind of tone that meant this wasn't a misunderstanding, it was an announcement. I don't care what kind of arrangement you two have. But if he didn't tell you I existed, you should probably ask why. He turned to her and finally spoke, quiet but firm. This isn't the place. It's exactly the place, she said. Because I'm not going to sit around and watch you bury one family just to build another from the dust. I stepped back and opened my door, not to invite them in, but to escape. He didn't follow. She did. Inside, I dropped the grocery bag on the table. Bananas spilled out, one hitting the floor and rolling under the chair. Neither of us moved to get it. He remained in the hallway. She stood just inside the frame like a storm cloud. I'm not here to make a scene, she said. But you deserve to know that the man who signs your rent check once left me and my mother for 4 years without a single visit. And when he finally showed up again, it was to sell the house she was dying in. I said nothing. The weight of her words hit slowly, not as accusation but as slow disassembly. Piece by piece, something cracked inside me. He hadn't lied. But he had carved out a very specific truth to show me. Why now? I finally asked. Because he's doing it again, she said. And this time, I see it coming. I walked her to the door without another word. She didn't resist. Just left quietly, her boots wetting the rug on the way out. He didn't speak when she passed him. Didn't follow her. He waited until she was gone. Only then did he step inside, his eyes searching mine for something, permission, defense, maybe just air. I pointed to the chair. He sat. She's not wrong, he said. But she's not right either. I made mistakes. I pulled away. When my wife got sick, I didn't know how to stay and watch her suffer, so I escaped. And yes, that meant my daughter paid for it. He paused. I tried to rebuild with her. But she doesn't believe rebuilding is possible. I sat across from him. The distance between us had never felt more real. She thinks I'm replacing what I lost with you, he continued. She doesn't understand that this, whatever this is, it's not filling an old hole. It's standing on its own. I didn't answer. He left soon after, quiet again. The door clicked behind him without force. I stood in the silence for a long time, hearing nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and the distant rumble of the heater. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the couch, eyes fixed on the ceiling, replaying every moment I had ever asked him a personal question and settled for half a truth. Not because I believed him, but because it was easier than digging. In the morning, the snow had melted into gray slush. I put on my boots, walked to the coffee shop near the edge of the neighborhood. I needed noise. Random conversations. Movement. Inside, the place buzzed with people trying to reclaim some version of normal after the holidays. A teenager wiping tables. Two older men arguing about a Packers game. A woman in scrubs staring into her phone. I sat in the back corner and watched it all. I didn't touch my coffee. When I returned home, there was a letter taped to the front door. Not in an envelope. Just folded paper, torn at the corner, taped with scotch in two places. It was from the management office. Final notice. All tenants must vacate within 14 days. Renovation permit had cleared. Construction to begin the following month. 14 days. I dropped the letter on the kitchen table and stared at it until my eyes blurred. That evening, I walked across the street. He was in the garage, sorting through boxes. Tools. Old cords. A coffee can full of nails. He looked up. Waited for me to speak. I held the paper out. It's over. He took it. Read it. Didn't flinch. No, it's not, he said. They don't own it yet. They will. Not if I move first. He stepped aside, pulled open a drawer, and removed a folder, thinner than the last, but heavier somehow. This is a revised bid. I found a silent partner. Someone who believes the property has value beyond condos. I stared at him. I'm putting in the offer tomorrow. Cash. I won't let them demolish what people still call home. You're fighting a storm with a paper shield. He smiled, tired but certain. Then I better hope the wind is weak. I left without another word. At home, I made a list, what I needed to pack, who to call, how to transfer my mail if it came to that. I didn't want to leave, but I didn't want to be caught unprepared again. 2 days passed. No news. No update. On the third morning, I opened my front door and froze. My ex was back. He stood on the steps, a duffel bag at his feet, a suitcase beside him. I'm moving in, he said casually. I applied for tenancy here last week. They approved me. I blinked. What? I used your name. Said we were back together. They asked for proof, so I gave them a few things from your old application. It went through yesterday. My hands went cold. They said it might help our case. 2 tenants. 1 unit. Slows things down legally. You lied, I said. I bought you time. You didn't ask. He shrugged. Behind me, something cracked, sharp, loud. I turned. The ceiling light in my hallway had shattered, the bulb popping from old wiring, glass scattering across the wood floor like a warning shot. He stepped forward, thinking it meant he should come inside. I raised a hand. No. What? You need to leave. He laughed. Come on. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I didn't flinch. This isn't your house. And then, behind me, a second voice. But it might be mine. I turned. His daughter was standing in my hallway, holding a folder, her eyes on me. And for the first time since she'd shown up, she smiled. You might want to see this, she said. Because I just bought your building. Her words dropped like ice water down my spine. I didn't move, didn't blink. Just stared at the folder in her hand and the certainty in her eyes. She stepped forward and placed it on the edge of my kitchen table. No drama. No explanation. Just a flat gesture that felt louder than any scream. Not officially yet, she said. But the paperwork's processed. The loan's clean. And the sale closes Friday. They never even looked at his counteroffer. Money talks. And I had more of it. She turned, took a step back toward the hallway, then paused and looked over her shoulder. I told you before. I wasn't here to make a scene. I was here to make sure he couldn't rewrite his life without remembering the one he left behind. Then she was gone. My ex stood frozen by the doorway, watching her walk away like a man who had accidentally stepped onto a stage mid-performance. The suitcase at his feet suddenly looked absurd. I shut the door before either of us could say anything. The moment it clicked shut, I felt something in my chest rupture. Not anger. Not grief. Something colder. Clearer. I picked up the folder. Inside were copies of the property deed, financial transfers, and a single printout of the offer. Her name signed at the bottom. No hesitation in the signature. I sat on the couch and stared out the window. The snow had started again. Slow, steady flakes drifting sideways in the streetlight. It made everything look quiet. Peaceful. But inside, I felt like the floor had shifted beneath me. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the old radiator sputter and hiss while the building it fed slowly slipped from my hands. In the morning, I walked across the street. He opened the door as if he'd been waiting. I held up the folder without a word. He scanned the cover. Took it. Flipped it open. His face didn't change, but something behind his eyes dropped away. A muscle in his jaw ticked once. How long? I asked. 2 weeks, he said quietly. I didn't know it was her. Not until yesterday. Why didn't you say anything? Because I thought I still had time. He placed the folder down slowly on the kitchen counter, like it was something fragile. She didn't do this to own property, he said. She did it to remind me who still has control over the parts of me I tried to repair. She did it to hurt you. No, he said. She did it to stop me from starting again. I didn't answer. I walked out. That afternoon, I drove to the west end of the city, toward the industrial zone where cheap storage units and unlicensed mechanics lined the roads. There was a lot of noise there, trucks reversing, machines grinding, and for a while, it drowned everything else out. I found a U-Haul lot. Not because I planned to rent anything yet, but because I needed to see the future in boxes. In motion. I stayed there until the sun dipped behind the warehouse roofs. On the drive back, I stopped by the bakery near the library. Bought a muffin I didn't want and a coffee I barely sipped. Sat on the bench outside watching traffic pass. The wind picked up hard enough to scatter a trash bin halfway into the road. Someone chased it. I didn't move. At home, I opened every drawer I owned. Laid things out on the floor. Not to pack, but to prove to myself that if I had to leave again, I'd know what mattered and what didn't. Then I heard the knock. He stood there with snow on his shoulders and no coat. "I need to show you something," he said. We got in his car. Drove in silence past the old train tracks and toward the south end of the city. He didn't explain. I didn't ask. We parked in front of a red brick building with flaking paint and a sign that had once read Peterson and Company, Real Estate and Appraisal. Now Just and Company. Inside, the front office was dark. He led me around to the back. A storage room. Filing cabinets. Dust. In the far corner, he pulled out a thin key from his pocket and unlocked a steel box. Inside were more documents. Old. Yellowed. Original leases from decades ago. He pointed to one. "That's your building," he said. "From before it was ever sold. My wife's family used to own it. We lived there once. Unit 2B. I looked at him. "I didn't buy the building to save you," he said. "I tried because I thought saving that building might redeem something I lost a long time ago." I stepped closer. I didn't know she would chase me this far. I didn't know she would want to take it from both of us. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I'm not sure yet," he said. "But I'm not giving it up without finishing the fight." We left in silence. Back at my place, the hallway light had finally been replaced by maintenance. A soft, warm bulb. Almost too warm. Inside, everything looked the same and completely different. I took down the picture on the wall. The one that came with the unit, a fake watercolor of a lighthouse. I wrapped it in a towel and shoved it under the sink. The next morning, I walked to the cafe. As I waited in line, I heard a voice behind me. Sharp. Directed. "I thought you'd be gone by now." I turned. She stood there again, arms crossed. "Buying this place wasn't personal," she said. "Not until he made it that way." I didn't answer. "But I won't back down just because he's found someone to stitch over the gap he left behind." "I'm not a replacement," I said calmly. "I'm a choice." She didn't respond. Just gave a small, bitter smile and turned away. That night, the doorbell rang. Not a knock, the actual bell, the one that almost never worked. I opened it. No one was there. Just a letter on the mat. Typed. From the City Development Board. It read. "Pending a third-party cash offer exceeding valuation by 3%, demolition and redevelopment permits are temporarily suspended. Transfer of ownership currently frozen under municipal review." No signature. No sender. Just a stamp. He had moved first. Again. The letter stayed on the floor for almost an hour before I picked it up again. I read it 3 times. Every word was clear, every line crisp, and yet it felt unreal. Like I had conjured it out of stubborn hope. Pending a third-party cash offer. Permits suspended. Transfer frozen. I knew what it meant. He'd found a way. Quietly. Legally. Without drama. Just like always. But what I didn't know was how. Or what it had cost him. Or whether it would hold. I left the apartment as the sky turned orange, my breath visible in the cold. I didn't knock this time. I just walked into his yard and waited by the side of the house, near the motion light that hadn't worked in months. He stepped out minutes later, holding a clipboard and a pen, like he'd been in the middle of something real, something grounded. He paused when he saw me. I held up the letter. His expression didn't change. But his grip on the clipboard relaxed. "It's not over," he said. But it's paused long enough to matter. You didn't tell me. You needed proof. Not promises. We didn't speak after that. I followed him into the garage. He had papers spread out over a folding table, maps, inspection reports, even a zoning appeal form half filled. This building is worth more than what she sees in it, he said. She thinks she's making a point. But I'm not letting her use my failure to erase a future. He paused, looked up at me. And you, are you still planning to leave? I said. But I'm tired of leaving every time someone else makes a choice for me. He gave a small nod. A recognition of something unspoken. I didn't stay. There was nothing else to say. Back at my apartment, I opened the kitchen cabinet and pulled down a tin of tea I'd been saving since last Christmas. I brewed it without thinking, then sat by the window watching the street go quiet. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was waiting. Not for a check, or a notice, or a knock. Just breathing. The next morning, a white sedan pulled into the lot behind the building. Out stepped a woman in a camel coat and a clipboard. City official. I watched from the stairwell window as she walked the perimeter, writing notes. She stopped once to take photos of the cracked brick on the east wall. I stayed hidden until she left. By early afternoon, I was back at the hardware store, picking up boxes. Not to pack, but to organize. To finally decide what stayed and what went. I found him there too, in aisle 6, comparing light switches. He didn't see me. I left before he turned around. When I returned home, the building felt different. Not saved. But paused. Like it had taken a breath too. Then, sometime around 7, a knock. I opened the door expecting him again. It was her. His daughter. This time, no folder in hand. No glare. She looked tired. The kind of tired that sits behind your eyes and doesn't go away with sleep. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. She sat down without asking, arms folded, legs crossed. I stayed standing. "I'm withdrawing the offer," she said, straight to the point. My body tensed. Why? Because it was never about the building. It was about him. And I thought that if I took something he wanted now, it might level what he took from before. She leaned back slightly, glanced toward the hallway like she needed a place to escape. "But watching you fight, it reminded me of her. My mother." She didn't speak loudly either. She just stood her ground until the ground started to shift. She stood. Smoothed her coat. "I'm not giving him forgiveness. But I'm done using you to prove a point." She walked to the door. Before she left, she turned to me one last time. "Whatever this is between you and him, don't waste it hiding from what you actually want." Then she was gone. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just stood still, long after the sound of her heels faded down the hallway. The next 2 days moved like a blur. He didn't call. I didn't visit. The city posted a new notice in the lobby, "Evaluation under review. All activity frozen pending further legal clarification." Neighbors whispered. A few even knocked on my door asking questions I couldn't answer. Then, on the third night, I walked across the street. He wasn't home. Lights off. No car. Garage closed. I waited. Sat on the step. Time passed. By midnight, I gave up. I walked back slowly, the cold now sharper, tighter around my chest. And that's when I saw it. An envelope on my door. Thin. No stamp. Just a key inside. A small note paper clipped to it. If you still want this, come find me. No address. No name. Just a key. And the door already slightly open.